In this video, we're going to continue where we left off and start talking about async await. I'm going to comment out the whole code right here by pressing Command A and then Command /, and now we can just scroll down and explore async await a bit. So what is async await? Async await is simply an addition to promises. It is an easier and cleaner way to work with promises. The main advantage of asynchronous functions is that they look and behave more like synchronous functions we're all used to. Because of that, it's easier to work with them. Let's take a look at a simple example. Const fetch number. Let's say that we're calling a specific number. And then that's going to be a simple function. And that function is going to return a number, let's say 25. Now, of course that you know how to retrieve the value of that, right? You put a console log and then simply call the fetch number function, just like so. This should result in 25, and we do get that in console right here. But now, let's say that we are fetching this from an asynchronous source, and let's make this function an async function. You do that by adding the async keyword in front of the arrow function, like so. If there's only one thing you're going to get from this video, that is that async functions return promises. So, as soon as we made this function an async function, it is not going to return what we return right there. It's going to return a promise. Now, let's save it and see what do we get. As you can see, we have fetch number async return 25, and then in the console, we got this. Promise fulfilled 25. We got back a promise and not the value itself. How can we know that? Well, if you try doing something like fetch number plus 5, you can see it's going to be object promise and then 5. It's not going to be simply a value of 30. So how can we now retrieve the value of 25 from that promise? Well, of course, you could do something with it so far, and that is simply call the fetch number. On the fetch number, we can call the .then, and then as the parameter, we get back the number, and then we can console log it. Console log number. If you do that, we get the value of 25. But now we didn't do anything differently. We are still using promises. Then the only thing we made differently is that we created an async function. Running this code now returns 25. This means that the promise was fulfilled when returned. And as you saw, if we didn't have this .then, it wouldn't work. We would simply get back the promise, but not the value. Now is the time to introduce the special await keyword. So when people talk about async, they always mention async and await. These two go hand in hand, they go together. The await keyword waits for the promise to return a result. How can we see that in action? Well, let's create a function, const, and let's do something like const console fetched number. And that is going to be a function. And then in there, we can explore that await keyword. What we can do is we can say this, fetch number. So now we're calling this previous function right here. But remember, that function returns a promise. So if we were to do something like this, console log fetch number, let's see what would we get. We have to call the console fetch number function as well. And now, as you can see, we get the promise as we expected. But now is the time for that await keyword. So the only thing you have to do is you can put the await keyword in front of the promise. And that's going to result in the actual value you're going to get after the promise, in this case 25. But there's one rule. If you want to use the await, you need to make that function asynchronous. So whenever you want to use the await, it needs to be inside of an asynchronous function. Now, if we save that, you can see we get the value of 25. Why is this special? Because you don't have to use the .then, .catch callbacks or anything else. You can make this code look like synchronous code. You can say const number is equal to await fetch number, and then you can console log the number. As you can see, this looks and behaves so much more like synchronous code. It is simply something you're already used to, and that's great. Now, to go back on our initial example, let's one more time refactor this thing, our whole application for fetching users, photos, and details. I'm going to uncomment all of that, and then below, we're going to compare three approaches. In here, we have the callbacks. In here, we have the promises. And then the third way is going to be an addition to promises, which is going to be an async await. The main thing to notice is that async await is simply an addition to promises. That means that we don't have to change anything about these three functions. The only thing we have to change is how we're calling them. So let's use async await that still uses promises, but with a nicer syntax. Down below, we can say const, and let's create a function called display data. That function is going to be an asynchronous function, and then in there, we can display anything we want. Let's call our display data function right now, just so we don't forget later. And then in there, we want to get access to all of the data we got here or here. To do that, we first have to call the fetch user function like so and pass in the name, like we did both in here and in here. But now take a look at the beauty of this. We can call it like this and simply put the await keyword in front of it. This is going to make sure that we wait for the result of this fetch user. And then you can store that in a variable. Const user is equal to await fetch user. Now, after we get the user, we can do the photos. So const photos is equal to await fetch user photos, just like so. And then we pass in that user we got here. Since we're using the await keyword, we're not going to get the same error we had before. Remember, we tried console logging something, but that something didn't exist yet. Like your name is user.username, and then it couldn't console log it because it was undefined, because it wasn't fetched yet. Await keyword is going to be 100% sure that this value here is already fetched, and only then is it going to move to the next line. So it waits on this line until this code is executed and we have the value of user. Then we can use the user here to get the photos, and then since we have the photos, we can get the details. So details is going to be equal to await fetch photo details, and then we can pass photos 0. And afterwards, we were looking for details, so we can simply do console log details. In here, fetch user photos, we needed to put user.username and not just user because that's an object. After we run it, after 2 seconds, we should get, now we have the user. 2 more, now we have the photos for Michael, and 2 more, now we have the photo details for the photo 1, and then we get the string of details. Is it only me, or the last way or the last approach looks so much more natural? It basically feels like the JavaScript we've been learning so far in this course. You don't have to use external.then syntax, you don't have to use callbacks everywhere, you simply declare a variable, put await, call the function, and that's it. Looks just like the synchronous code. And that's it. We've came to the end of a long section about asynchronous JavaScript. It is hard, so I would advise you to rewatch it if you don't understand everything fully yet, but don't worry, because once you actually start using promises, it's going to be so much easier than this. You won't have to create your own promises most likely, you're simply going to have to fetch some data. The only thing you will have to do is do something like this. Const data is equal to fetch data. But now you know how this works in depth. You know how JavaScript executes certain lines. So once you dive into real API data fetching, this is going to be so much simpler for you. People have a lot of trouble understanding asynchronous JavaScript, but now that shouldn't be the problem for you.